Welcome to Lexivia English. Ready to take your English to the next level? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. So sit back, listen carefully, and enjoy the journey.
Chapter 1. The Moment Everything Changed. At exactly 12 o'clock GMT on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, the impossible happened. Every nuclear weapon on Earth detonated simultaneously, not gradually, not in a chain reaction, but all at once. From the smallest tactical warheads to the massive hydrogen bombs stored in underground silos. In total, approximately 13,000 nuclear weapons released their devastating energy across the planet in the same instant. The explosions created a terrifying light show visible from space. Satellites recorded brilliant flashes, appearing like deadly fireworks across every continent. The combined explosive power was equivalent to 4,000 megatons, roughly 266,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Within the first second, the fate of human civilization was sealed. The immediate destruction was beyond imagination. Major cities like Moscow, Washington, D.C., Beijing, London, and Paris were instantly vaporized, along with millions of their inhabitants. The heat from the explosions reached temperatures of 100 million degrees Celsius, 6 times hotter than the core of the sun. Everything within a 50-kilometer radius of each major blast was turned to ash and vapor. But this was only the beginning. The real catastrophe was about to unfold on a global scale. Chapter 2. Nuclear winter begins. Within hours of the detonations, massive amounts of dust, ash, and rare radioactive particles were thrown high into the atmosphere. The combined explosions lifted an estimated 150 million tons of debris into the stratosphere, creating a thick, dark blanket that began to circle the globe. This phenomenon, known as nuclear winter, would change the planet's climate for years to come, as the sun's rays were blocked by the radioactive clouds. Temperatures around the world began to drop rapidly. Within the first week, average global temperatures fell by 10 degrees Celsius. In some regions, it felt like the middle of winter, even though it was summer. Crops began to die as sunlight became scarce, and photosynthesis, the process that keeps plants alive, nearly stopped. The survivors, mostly people who lived far from major cities and military targets, found themselves in a world that looked like an alien planet. The sky remained dark grey, with an eerie orange glow on the horizon. Snow fell in places that had never seen snow before. The air tasted of metal and ash, and strange-coloured rain fell from the contaminated clouds. Animals began to behave strangely. Birds, confused by the perpetual twilight, lost their ability to navigate. Many species simply stopped reproducing. Within months, the delicate balance of nature that had taken millions of years to develop was completely destroyed. Chapter 3: The radiation spreads. The radioactive fallout from the simultaneous explosions didn't respect any boundaries. Carried by wind patterns and ocean currents, deadly radiation spread across the entire planet like an invisible poison. Even areas that weren't directly hit by nuclear weapons became dangerous to human life. Radiation sickness became humanity's new enemy. The survivors experienced symptoms they had only read about in science books: nausea, hair loss, bleeding, and organ failure. Those who were exposed to high levels of radiation died within weeks. Others developed cancers that would kill them over the following years. The human immune system, weakened by radiation, could no longer fight off simple diseases. Children were especially vulnerable. Those born after the nuclear catastrophe often had serious genetic mutations and health problems. The human gene pool, which had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, was permanently damaged in a single day. Scientists estimated that it would take at least 10,000 years for radiation levels to return to safe levels in many areas. Clean water became almost impossible to find. Rivers, lakes, and underground water sources were contaminated with radioactive particles. People had to choose between dying of thirst or risking radiation poisoning. Many communities tried to create primitive filtration systems, but most were ineffective against nuclear contamination. Chapter 4: The Collapse of Civilization. Without governments, armies, or major cities, human civilization began to collapse like a house of cards. The global economy, which had connected every corner of the world, simply stopped functioning. Banks, stock markets, and international trade networks disappeared overnight. Money became worthless. Survival was now the only currency that mattered. Transportation systems broke down completely. Airports, train stations, and highways that connected the world were either destroyed or abandoned. The few remaining vehicles couldn't operate for long without fuel, and oil refineries had been primary targets in the nuclear exchange. People who survived found themselves isolated in small communities, cut off from the rest of humanity. Medical care, which modern humans had taken for granted, became primitive. Hospitals were destroyed, doctors were dead, and medicine was scarce. People began dying from diseases that had been easily treatable just days before. Broken bones, infections, and even childbirth became potentially fatal events. Knowledge itself was under threat. Libraries, universities, and computer servers that stored human learning were destroyed. The internet, which had contained the sum of human knowledge, was gone. Survivors had to rely on whatever information they could remember or find in damaged books. Chapter 5: Fighting for Survival. In this harsh new world, the remaining humans faced impossible choices every day. Small groups of survivors formed communities, often fighting each other for limited resources. Food became so scarce that people were forced to eat anything they could find. Insects, tree bark, and even contaminated animals. Some communities tried to grow food indoors using artificial light, but without proper seeds or equipment, most attempts failed. The few successful agricultural efforts produced crops with dangerous levels of radiation. People had to choose between starvation and poisoning themselves slowly. Violence became common as desperation grew. Communities fought wars over clean water sources, canned food, and medical supplies. Trust between strangers became almost impossible. Parents had to make heartbreaking decisions about whether to share their limited food with their own children or let them slowly starve. Leadership emerged in unexpected ways. Sometimes a doctor or teacher became the leader of a community. Other times, it was the person with the most weapons or the strongest will to survive. Democracy and human rights became luxuries that no one could afford in the struggle to stay alive. Chapter 6: The Long Darkness. Years passed, and the nuclear winter continued. The combination of blocked sunlight and radioactive contamination created a world that seemed frozen in time. Seasons became meaningless. It was always cold, always dark, and always dangerous. The human population, which had been nearly 8 billion people before the nuclear catastrophe, had fallen to perhaps 50 million worldwide. Most of these survivors lived in remote areas that had been spared the worst of the initial destruction. They lived like their ancestors had thousands of years ago, in small tribes, hunting and gathering whatever they could find. Children who were born after the nuclear exchange grew up in a world their parents could barely explain. They had never seen a blue sky, never experienced a warm summer day, and never known a world without radiation. To them, this harsh reality was normal. They developed survival skills that their parents never needed to learn. Some communities tried to preserve human culture and knowledge. They told stories about the old world, about cities with millions of people, about machines that could fly, about computers that could answer any question. But to the children, these stories sounded like fairy tales. Chapter 7: Hope in the Darkness. Despite the overwhelming catastrophe, human nature showed its remarkable ability to adapt and survive. In some communities, people began to develop new technologies using salvaged materials. They created simple radiation detectors, built greenhouse gardens using candlelight, and developed new methods for purifying water. Education took on a new importance. The few remaining teachers worked to pass on essential knowledge to children, not literature or history, but practical skills like medicine, engineering, and agriculture. Every piece of knowledge was precious because it might mean the difference between survival and extinction. Art and music didn't disappear entirely. In the evening, around small fires, people still sang songs and told stories. Children drew pictures with charcoal on walls, depicting both the terrible world they knew and their dreams of a better future. These simple acts of creativity reminded people that they were still human. Some communities began to establish trade relationships with other survivor groups. They exchanged medicine for food, tools for knowledge, and stories for hope. Slowly, very slowly, the foundations of a new civilization began to emerge from the ashes of the old one. Chapter 8: The New World. 50 years after the nuclear catastrophe, the Earth was a fundamentally different planet. The radiation levels had decreased somewhat, but large areas remained uninhabitable. The climate had partially recovered, but weather patterns were still unpredictable and often violent. The human population had stabilized at around 100 million people worldwide, roughly the same as it had been 2,000 years ago. These survivors had developed into distinct communities, each adapted to their specific environment. Some lived in underground cities built from the ruins of old subway systems. Others had learned to farm in contaminated soil using specially developed techniques. Technology had regressed centuries in some ways, but advanced in others. While there were no more computers or airplanes, people had become experts at surviving in a radioactive environment. They had developed new medical treatments for radiation sickness and created tools that their ancestors never needed. The new human societies were different from those that existed before the catastrophe. Having survived the ultimate disaster, people valued cooperation over competition, sustainability over growth, and community over individual success. Wars still happened, but they were small conflicts over local resources rather than global ideological battles.